The cantina was darker than most places on Kepler 7 station. Steam rose from cooking pots in the back kitchen, mixing strange smells that would make a human sick. But this was not a place for humans. This was where the galaxy's forgotten soldiers came to drink and forget. Commander Zethkar sat alone at a corner table. His thick shell was cracked in 3 places from old battles. One of his forearms hung lower than the others, broken long ago and never fixed right. His big bug eyes looked tired, very tired. He lifted his glass with one hand and drank the blue liquid inside. It tasted like metal and burned his throat. This was his 3rd glass tonight, maybe his 4th. He stopped counting after the 2nd one. The cantina was full but quiet. A group of Vorthan traders played cards near the window. Their gray skin looked almost white under the cheap lights. At another table, 2 Cathera officers argued about something in their clicking language. Their long necks moved like snakes as they talked. Everyone here had fought in wars. Everyone here had lost something. Some lost friends. Some lost homes. Zethkar had lost his faith in winning. The door opened with a soft sound. Lieutenant Vexali walked in. She was young for a hegemony officer. Her shell was still bright green. Without any battle scars, her eyes moved around the room like she was looking for someone. She found him. Vexali walked over to his table. Her steps were careful and quiet. She had heard stories about Commander Zethkar. He was a legend in the hegemony fleet. He had fought in more battles than most officers could count. He had seen things that were not in any official reports. "Commander," she said in a soft voice. "May I sit?" Zethkar looked up at her. His eyes were hard to read, like most insect faces. But something in the way he held his head told her he was thinking. After a long moment, he pointed to the chair across from him. She sat down and put her hands on the table. "Commander, I have heard stories about you. They say you were at the first contact incident. They say you have fought against humans." The word humans made the cantina go quiet. Even the Vorthan traders stopped their card game. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of humans. Most had never seen one. But everyone knew to be afraid. Zethkar set his glass down hard on the table. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "What do you want to know, Lieutenant?" "I want to know why," she said. "Why does High Command classify everything about them? Why do admirals get nervous when someone mentions Earth? Why are we afraid of a species that only has one small planet?" Zethkar looked around the cantina. Other aliens were listening now. A Cathara pilot had turned his long neck to hear better. Alt 2. Hegemony soldiers at the bar had stopped talking. Even the old Vorthan bartender was cleaning the same glass over and over while he listened. "You really want to know?" Zethkar asked. "Yes, sir." He picked up his glass and finished the blue liquid in one drink. Then he set it down and looked at her with all 4 of his compound eyes. 30 years ago, I was a young officer like you," he began. "I thought I knew how war worked. I thought I understood all the species in the galaxy. The Cathera were smart, but weak. The Vorthon had good ships, but small crews. The hegemony was strong because we had many soldiers." He paused and signaled the bartender for another drink. Then the human showed up. The bartender brought over a new glass of the blue. "Drink." Zethkar did not touch it right away. "It was at Proxima Station," he continued. 3 fleets were fighting there. Us, the Cathara, and the Vorthan Republic. It was a normal battle. Each side trying to take the station without losing too many ships. Vexali leaned forward. She had read about Proxima Station in her military history classes. But the official reports only said there was an unexpected third-party intervention. "We detected a new ship coming toward the battle," Zethkar said. "It was small and ugly. It's made of metal plates welded together. It moved slow and looked like it might fall apart." Around the cantina, other aliens were listening openly now. Stories about humans were rare. Most official reports were classified. But here was someone who had actually seen them fight. "At first, we thought it was just another minor species," Zethkar continued. "Maybe coming to surrender or ask for protection. The ship sent a message saying they were responding to a distress call. We thought they were confused." He lifted his new glass but did not drink from it yet. The ship was called the Defiant. It had maybe 20 crew members. Their captain was a human named Jake Morrison. His voice sounded calm when he talked on the radio. to calm for someone flying into a three-way battle. Vexelli waited for him to continue. Around them, the cantina was completely quiet now. Morrison did something that broke every rule of space combat, Zethkar said. Instead of running away or picking a side, he flew straight into the middle of the fighting. Not to attack anyone, to protect the civilian ships that were trying to escape. The old commander's voice got quieter. There were refugee ships full of families trying to get away from the battle. All three fleets were so busy fighting each other, we ignored the civilians. It was not our job to protect them. But the humans made it their job. He finally took a sip of his drink. The Defiant put itself between our weapons and the refugee ships. When we fired at the station, they blocked our shots. When the Vorthon launched torpedoes, the humans used their own ship as a shield. Vexali could not believe what she was hearing. They protected ships from all three fleets, even though we were enemies? That was just the beginning, Zethkar said. When their weapons failed, they kept fighting with emergency systems. When their engines broke, they used thruster packs to ram our fighters. I watched a human in a spacesuit with nothing but a mining laser hold off an entire boarding party. The cantina was so quiet now that everyone could hear the air recycling system humming in the walls. But the strangest part, Zethkar continued, was that they got stronger as the fight went on. Most species get tired and make mistakes when they are losing. Humans do the opposite. The more hopeless the situation became, the harder they fought. He looked around the room at all the listening faces. By the end of the battle, they had saved every single civilian ship. Not one refugee died that day, but it cost them almost everything. Their ship was destroyed. Half their crew was dead or wounded. Vexali stared at him. What happened to the survivors? Zethkar's expression became darker. We captured them for questioning. That was when we learned the truth about humans. That was when everything changed. The old commander stood up from his chair. He left money on the table for his drinks. But that, Lieutenant, is a story for another time. As he walked toward the door, Vexali called after him. Commander, wait. You cannot stop there. He turned back to look at her one last time. Come back tomorrow night, Lieutenant. Bring whoever else wants to hear the rest. Because what I learned from those human prisoners changed how I think about war forever. Then he was gone, leaving behind a cantina full of aliens who suddenly understood why their governments were so afraid of a species from one small blue planet. The next night, the cantina was more crowded than usual. Word had spread about Commander Zethkar's story. Lieutenant Vexali arrived early and saved the same corner table. She was not alone this time. 3 other hegemony officers sat with her. 2 Cathara pilots had taken the table next to them. Even some Vorthan traders had stayed after finishing their business deals. Everyone wanted to hear more about the humans. Zethkar walked in at the same time as the night before. He looked around the room and saw all the waiting faces. His mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. He sat down in the same chair and ordered the same blue drink. I see word has traveled, he said to Vexali. Yes, sir. Everyone. Wants to know what happened after the battle. Zethkar waited for his drink to arrive. When the bartender brought it, he took a long sip and looked around the room. Before I tell you about the prisoners, he began, you need to understand what the galaxy was like before humans came. He set his glass down and pointed to different tables in the cantina. For thousands of years, we all knew our place. The Kithara were the smart ones. They could plan battles better than anyone. They knew when to attack and when to retreat. Their computers could predict what enemies would do. He pointed to the Vorthan traders. The Vorthan had the best technology. Their ships were faster and their weapons were stronger. They could win fights with fewer soldiers because their equipment was so good. Then he tapped his own chest with one of his 4 hands. The hegemony was the strongest because we had the most soldiers, could lose battles and still win wars because we had endless numbers. Every species in the galaxy followed patterns. Predictable patterns. A young Cathara pilot leaned forward from the next table. What kind of patterns, Commander? Simple ones? Zethkar replied. The Cathara always retreat when they lose 12% of their forces, always. The Vorthan pull back when their energy levels drop below 30%. The hegemony falls back when command structure breaks down. He took another drink. Patterns kept the galaxy stable. Wars were like giant chess games. Everyone knew the rules. Battles were fought until one side reached their breaking point. Then they would surrender or retreat. Clean and organized. Vexali interrupted. Humans do not follow patterns. Humans do not even know patterns exist, Zethkar said. Let me tell you about the Battle of Proxima Station. The real story? The cantina became completely quiet. Even the kitchen sound stopped. It started as a normal three-way fight. The hegemony wanted Proxima Station because it controlled 3 trade routes. The Cathara wanted it because it was perfect for their new colony plans. Vorthon wanted it because it had rare metals in the asteroid belt. He paused and looked around the room. We had been fighting for 6 days. Standard procedure. The Cathara would attack, lose some ships, then pull back to Replin. The Vorthon would hit us with their best weapons, then retreat to recharge. We would send wave after wave of fighters until someone made a mistake. A Vorthon, traitor at the bar, spoke up. I remember that battle. The news report said it lasted 2 weeks. It would have. Zethkar nodded. But then the Defiant arrived. He stood up and walked to the middle of the cantina. Everyone turned to watch him. Picture this: 3 fleets of warships, hundreds of fighters, thousands of soldiers, all following the same dance we had done for centuries. Then this tiny human ship flies right into the middle of everything. He moved his hands to show the positions of the fleets. Captain Jake Morrison sent a message to all 3 fleets. He said they had received a distress call about civilian ships trapped in the battle zone. He asked all of us to stop fighting long enough to let the refugees escape. Several aliens in the cantina made sounds of disbelief. We ignored him, of course, Zethkar continued. The Cathara ignored him. The Vorthon ignored him. Civilians always get caught in battles. That is just how war works. He sat back down at his table, but Morrison did not accept that answer. He flew his ship directly between the refugee convoy and our weapons. When we fired at the station, he blocked our shots with his own hull. When Cathara fighters attacked the civilians, human crew members in spacesuits flew out to fight them with hand weapons. Vexali shook her head. That is suicide, not tactics. That is what we thought too, Zethkar agreed. I was commanding a squadron of heavy fighters. My orders were to destroy any ship that got in our way, so I targeted the Defiant. A long drink before continuing. The human ship should have been destroyed in the first attack. It was old and slow, but somehow it kept moving. When we damaged their main engines, they used backup thrusters. When we knocked out their weapons, they started ramming our fighters. The old commander's voice became quieter. I watched a human named Lisa Grant pilot a damaged shuttle with no weapons straight into one of our assault ships. She had no chance of winning. But she bought the refugees 10 more minutes to escape. Around the cantina, aliens were listening. With complete attention. Then there was Pete Collins, their chief engineer. When we boarded their ship, he held the engine room alone for 2 hours. 2 hours against 20 hegemony Marines. He had nothing but a plasma wrench and some spare parts. Zethkar looked directly at Vexali. Do you know what he was doing while we were trying to kill him? He was fixing the refugee ship's engines, even while he was bleeding and outnumbered. He was helping strangers escape. A hegemony officer at another table spoke up. How is that possible? Why would he not surrender? That is exactly what we asked him after we finally captured him, Zethkar replied. His answer changed everything I thought I knew about war. The commander stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, they could see the lights of ships. Coming and going from the station, Collins was badly wounded. Half dead, we had him in our interrogation room. Our best questioners were trying to understand human tactics. They asked him why he did not retreat when he was clearly beaten. Zethkar turned back to face the room. Now he looked at them like they were stupid, okay? Then he said something that made no sense to us. He said, there were kids on those ships. Kids do not get to choose to be in wars. So we choose for them. The cantina was so quiet that everyone could hear the station's gravity generators humming. Our interrogators asked him to explain. They wanted to know what tactical advantage he gained by protecting enemy civilians. Collins just stared at them. Then he asked a question that no one could answer. Zethkar sat back down and finished his drink. He asked, "If you do not protect the innocent, what are you fighting for?" Several aliens in the cantina shifted uncomfortably. In their chairs, the question went all the way up to high command. Military leaders across the galaxy tried to find an answer. But there was no answer in any tactical manual. No computer model could process it. He signaled for another drink. That was when we realized we were not fighting another military force. We were fighting something completely different. Something that did not follow any rules we understood. Vexali leaned forward. "What happened to the human prisoners?" Zethkar's expression became even more serious. "That lieutenant is where." The story becomes truly frightening, because what we learned from them changed how every government in the galaxy thinks about humans. He stood up from the table. "Come back tomorrow night, because what I'm going to tell you next explains why 3 galactic superpowers are afraid of one small blue planet." On the third night, the cantina was packed. News of Commander Zethkar's stories had reached every level of Kepler-7 station. Military officers sat next to civilian traders. Scientists crowded around tables with ship mechanics. Even some station security guards were listening from the doorway. Lieutenant Vexali had arrived 2 hours early to save the corner table. She watched as more and more beings filled the room. Everyone wanted to hear what the old commander knew about humans. When Zethkar walked in, the entire cantina went silent. He looked around at all the faces watching him. Hegemony, Cathara, Vorthon, and a dozen other species, all waiting to hear secrets their governments had hidden from them. Sat down at his usual table. The bartender brought his blue drink without being asked. "I see my audience has grown," Zethkar said with a click of his mandibles. "Word spreads fast on a space station, Commander," Vexali replied. Zethkar nodded and took a sip of his drink. "Good, because tonight I will tell you about the interrogations, about what we learned from the human prisoners, and why every military in the galaxy changed their tactics after Proxima Station." He set his glass down and looked around the room. After we captured the survivors from the Defiant, High Command wanted answers. How did 20 humans hold off 3 fleets? Why did they fight harder when they were losing? What kind of training made them so dangerous? A Cathara pilot called out from across the room. "What did you find, Commander?" "Nothing," Zethkar replied. And that was the most terrifying discovery of all. He stood up and walked to the center of the cantina again. He brought in our best interrogators. Experts who could break down the psychology of any known species. They started with standard questions about military structure and chain of command. Zethkar paused and looked at a group of hegemony officers. The humans had no special training. Captain Morrison was a cargo hauler before he joined their space fleet. Lisa Grant learned to fly by delivering mail between Earth colonies. Collins fixed mining equipment before he became a ship engineer. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the cantina. Our interrogators thought the humans were lying, Zethkar continued. No ordinary cargo workers could fight like that. So they dug deeper. They asked about human military doctrine and battle tactics. He took another drink before continuing. The humans looked confused by the questions. When asked about acceptable loss ratios, they did not understand what that meant. When asked about strategic retreat protocols, they just stared blankly. A Vorthan trader leaned forward. "How do they fight wars without tactics?" "That is what we wanted to know," Zethkar replied, "so we changed our approach. Instead of asking about military strategy, we asked about human culture, about their history and beliefs." The commander sat back down at his table. What we learned changed everything. Humans do not have one government or one military. They have hundreds of different countries on their planet, countries that have fought each other for thousands of years. Vexali looked puzzled. If they fight each other, why did they work together so well? Because fighting taught them something we have forgotten, Zethkar said. It taught them about sacrifice. He gestured to different aliens around the room. Every species here developed space travel by working together. We learned to solve problems through cooperation and logic. We avoided wars by making smart deals. And following rules, his voice became darker. Humans learned space travel while still fighting wars on their own planet. They built rockets while bombs fell on their cities. They reached the stars while their soldiers died in trenches. The cantina was completely silent now. Our interrogators asked Sergeant Maria Santos about this. She was a human Marine who held a corridor against 12 of our soldiers for 6 hours. It's just one human with a broken rifle and some grenades. Zethkar looked directly at Vexali. We asked her why she did not surrender when she was outnumbered. Her answer made no tactical sense. She said there were children hiding behind her. Children she had never met before. Children from a species she had never seen before. He took a long drink. Our interrogators pressed her for more details. They wanted to understand the strategic value of protecting alien civilians. Santos just looked at them like they were insane. Several aliens in the cantina shifted uncomfortably. She asked our interrogators a simple question. She said, "If you will not protect children, what makes you different from the monsters?" Our experts had no answer for that. A young hegemony officer spoke up. "But Commander, that makes no military sense. Soldiers should follow orders, not personal feelings." Zethkar nodded. That is exactly what our commanders thought, so they brought in Captain Morrison for questioning. Surely the ship's commander would have logical explanations. Old veteran stood up again and walked to the window. Morrison was badly wounded but alert. Our interrogators asked him about his mission objectives at Proxima Station. They wanted to know who ordered him to protect the refugees. Zethkar turned back to face the room. Morrison told them no one had given him any orders. The ship was not even supposed to be in that sector. They were returning from a supply run when they picked up the distress signals. A Cathera scientist called out, "Then why did he risk his ship and crew?" "Because he could not live with himself if he did not try to help," Zethkar replied. That was his exact answer. He said watching innocent people die while he had the power. To help them would be worse than death. The commander sat back down heavily. Our interrogators were confused. They asked Morrison to explain this human concept of honor. They wanted to understand why he valued the lives of strangers over his own mission. Zethkar's voice became very quiet. Morrison looked tired when he answered. Said humans had learned something from all their wars. Said they learned that the moment you stop caring about innocent people, you stop being worth saving yourself. Cantina was so quiet that everyone could hear their own breathing. That interview was sent to every military command in the galaxy. Psychologists studied it for months. Computer experts tried to create models to predict human behavior. He finished his drink and set the glass down hard. They all came to the same conclusion. Humans do not fight for territory or resources or strategic advantage. They fight for ideas. Abstract concepts that cannot be measured or calculated. Vexali leaned forward. "What kind of ideas, Commander? Justice? Protection of the innocent? The belief that some things are worth dying for, even if you gain nothing by it?" Zethkar looked around the room at all the watching faces. "Do you understand what this means? For thousands of years, galactic warfare has been predictable. We could calculate when enemies would retreat. We knew how much pain each species could take before they gave up." He stood up one more time. "But humans get stronger when they are in pain. They fight harder when they are losing. They become more dangerous when they have nothing left to lose except their beliefs." A Vorthan trader asked the question everyone was thinking, how do you defeat an enemy like that? Zethkar walked toward the door. "That, my friends, is what I will tell you tomorrow night. Because what happened after the interrogations explains why the galaxy fears humans more than any weapon or army." He paused at the door and looked back. "I will tell you about the Salvation War, and why 3 galactic superpowers learned to never underestimate a species that fights for strangers." Then he was gone, leaving behind a cantina full of beings who were beginning to understand that humans were not just another alien species. They were something entirely different. Something that changed the rules of everything. On the 4th night, the cantina could not hold everyone who wanted to hear the end of Commander Zethkar's story. Beings stood in the hallways outside. Others pressed against the windows. Even some ship captains had delayed their departures. To listen, Lieutenant Vexali sat at the corner table with a dozen other officers. They had been talking quietly before the commander arrived. Everyone had questions. Everyone wanted to understand what made humans so different from every other species in the galaxy. When Zethkar walked into the cantina, The crowd parted to let him through. He looked older tonight, more tired. Like telling these stories was taking something out of him. He sat down at his table and waited for his usual drink. The bartender brought it quickly, then stepped back to listen like everyone else. "Tonight I will tell you about the Salvation War," Zethkar began. His voice was quieter than the previous nights. "And after tonight, you will understand why your governments classify everything about humans." He took a sip of his blue drink and looked around the packed room. 5 years after Proxima Station, we thought we understood humans. We created new military protocols based on what we learned. We trained our soldiers to expect unpredictable behavior. We built computer models that included human emotional responses. A Cathara pilot near the window called out, "Did it work?" "Commander, for a while," Zethkar nodded. "We had 3 small conflicts with human ships over the next few years. Each time we were ready for their tactics. We knew they would protect civilians, knew they would fight harder when losing. We thought we had learned to predict them." Set his glass down and stood up. Then came the Zephyr crisis. A plague had broken out on 12 colony worlds in the Outer Rim. Millions of beings were dying. Plague was spreading faster than any medical team could stop it. Zethkar walked to the center of the room. The 3 major powers held an emergency. Council, the Hegemony, the Cathara Republic, and the Vorthon Union all agreed on the same solution. Quarantine the infected worlds, let the plague burn itself out, save the rest of the galaxy. Murmurs of understanding rippled through the crowd. Everyone remembered the Zephyr crisis. It was standard procedure during plague outbreaks. "The humans were not invited to the council," Zethkar continued. "They only controlled one small system. Why would their opinion matter? We sent them a message explaining our decision. We told them to stay away from the quarantine zone." He paused and looked at Vexali. The human sent back a 2-word message: "No thanks." Several aliens in the cantina made sounds of confusion. Within days, human ships started appearing in the quarantine zone. Not warships, medical ships. Cargo haulers converted into hospitals. Passenger liners carrying doctors and supplies. Zethkar's voice became harder. "We warned them to leave. The Cathara sent diplomatic messages. Vorthon threatened trade sanctions. The Hegemony moved a battle fleet to the edge of the quarantine zone." He walked back to his table, but did not sit down. "The humans ignored all of us. They set up medical stations on every infected world. They sent teams of doctors into the most dangerous areas. They started treating patients that every other species had written off as dead." A Vorthon trader asked, "Why did they risk infection? What did they gain?" "Nothing," Zethkar replied. "They gained nothing. They lost ships to the plague. They lost crew members. They spent their resources helping strangers who could never repay them." He finally sat back down. "But the worst part was not that they ignored our quarantine. The worst part was that they were succeeding. Human doctors were finding ways to slow the plague. Human engineers were building better medical equipment. Human scientists were working day and night to find a cure." Commander took another drink. "After 2 months, it became clear that the humans might actually save those worlds. 12 planets that we had given up for dead were starting to recover. The plague was retreating." Vexali leaned forward. "That should have been good news, Commander." "It was terrible news," Zethkar said firmly. "Do you understand what it meant? It meant that 3 galactic superpowers had abandoned millions of innocent beings to die. While one small species with primitive technology was saving them all, the cantina went completely silent. High Command called an emergency meeting. Military leaders from all 3 powers gathered to discuss the human problem. Not their ships or weapons. Their example. Zethkar stood up again and walked to the window. "You see, the humans were making us look like cowards. They were showing the galaxy that the quarantine was not necessary. That we had chosen the easy solution instead of the right one." He turned back to face the crowd. "So the 3 powers made a decision. We would stop the humans by force. We would enforce the quarantine. We told ourselves we were protecting galactic security." A young Hegemony officer spoke up. "What happened when you tried to stop them?" Zethkar's expression became dark. "General Patricia Vance was commanding the human medical fleet. When our combined battle group arrived, she sent us a message." said the humans would not leave while people were still dying. He walked back to his table. We gave them 1 hour to evacuate. We thought they would run like any sensible species would. 3 fleets against a handful of medical ships. The odds were impossible. Zethkar sat down heavily. Instead, the humans did something that broke every rule of warfare. They called for volunteers. The aliens in the cantina looked confused. Volunteers? Vexali asked. Human civilians, Zethkar explained. Farmers, teachers, shop owners, people with no military training. General Vance sent a message to Earth asking for anyone willing to help protect the medical ships. He shook his head slowly. Thousands of humans came. They flew cargo ships and passenger shuttles into a war zone. They had no weapons and no armor. They just formed a wall of ships around the medical stations. The commander's voice became very quiet. When we moved to attack the medical ships, we would have to go through the civilians first. Unarmed civilians who had volunteered to die for strangers. A Cathara scientist called out, "What did you do?" We stopped, Zethkar admitted. 3 of the most powerful militaries in the galaxy stopped because we could not bring ourselves to fire on unarmed volunteers. He finished his drink in 1 gulp, but that was not the end. More human ships kept arriving. Scientists, engineers, even children with their families, all volunteering to help or to stand in our way. Zethkar looked around the room at all the listening faces. After a week, we had a choice. Start a war by killing thousands of human civilians, or let them continue saving the plague worlds. He stood up one final time. We chose to retreat. 3 galactic superpowers backed down from 1 small species that was willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. The cantina was so quiet that everyone could hear the station's life support systems humming. The humans saved all 12 worlds. The plague was cured. Millions of beings lived because humans refused to abandon them. Zethkar walked toward the door. That is why we fear humans, Lieutenant. Not because they are strong or smart or have good weapons. We fear them because they remind us what we used to be before we became civilized. He paused at the door and looked back one last time. Humans are dangerous because they still believe that some things are worth dying for. They believe that protecting the innocent is more important than protecting yourself. They believe that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Zethkar's voice carried to every corner of the packed cantina. The galaxy fears humans because they are everything we wish we could be, but have forgotten how to become. They are what we were before we learned to calculate the cost of caring. Then the old commander walked out into the station corridors, leaving behind hundreds of beings who finally understood why their governments kept human files classified in the quiet cantina. Aliens from a dozen different species sat thinking about courage, sacrifice, and the terrible beauty of a species that would risk everything to save strangers. They thought about what they had lost in becoming civilized, and they wondered if it was too late to remember what it meant to be heroes.